The Family Skeptical, Parenting Through Nonbelief.
We're a married atheist couple raising two wonderful, strange children. We ask big questions, dissect weird parenting moments, and examine how society ignores or misrepresents family like ours. If you're any stripe of nonbeliever who's involved in raising children, welcome. You are our people.
Our kids have heard all our swears, but yours might not have. So be thoughtful if there are young people listening with you.
Welcome to 2023, moms.
Yeah. I mentioned in the show notes, but I don't know if anybody reads those. In our last episode, I had to delete a whole section because I kept referring to the current year as 2020.
That's awkward. I didn't even pick up on that. Yeah.
Clearly, I didn't either. So
yeah.
I'm going to try to actually...
You should have kept it in for
just to be
humor.
Wildly confusing.
Yes.
I feel like I should mention that we're going to be trying some new things this year. So it was actually kind of fun. We had a really long discussion about the podcast on the drive back from your parents' place from Christmas.
Yes.
And we talked about some of the things you wanted to do. So we're going to be trying to keep things a little bit more organized, trying some different segments. So you might notice that the format moving forward is a little bit different than it's been.
I think it's going to be fun.
I hope so. So I wanted to start out this first episode of 2023 talking a little bit about our Christmas because it was a little bit unique. So do you want to set up what happened or should I?
I can if you want.
Yeah, go for it.
All right, we planned to leave on a Friday right after the kids got out of school, but the borders were shut down because of Winter Storm Elliott. And so we were stuck until, after Christmas to head to my parents' house on Boxing Day. Or actually, we left on Christmas Day and drove on Christmas Day and then got there on Boxing Day. And everything was fine after that, but it was a lot of let's wait and see what the weather / the border / the roads will be like before pulling the trigger. And then we sort of pulled the trigger on Christmas Day morning and just raced out the door and got on the road and spent the night in Pittsburgh. First time in Pittsburgh. Lovely city.
Yeah. So I think I should add that Reader and Go have gotten pretty good at long drives, but because of the storm, this drive was close to twice as long as we normally do because we had to take a different route.
They were great.
They were amazing. And I think it was just such an interesting moment because, the kids were really looking forward to the trip. And so when it got delayed, it was interesting to see how everybody dealt with it. What do you think was the hardest moment for the boys?
I think that initial Friday moment where Reader shut down while Skyping with your mom. Mm-hmm. At the spur of the moment, Skype with your mom because she learned that we were stuck here and she was happy to help try to distract them. And Go was okay with it, but Reader was really, really put out. And, we did something fun on Christmas Eve for the first time ever. We let them open a gift that we were planning on bringing with us to my parents' house, thus saving us from having to bring it to my parents' house and then back again. So that was nice, but they had the hardest time that first day. And after that, it was we're just waiting. We're all being patient. We all want to go. And I thought it was wonderful. I think they got a chance to explore their own ability to manage a stressful situation because I kept hearing them talk it out. They talked about how, when we leave, when we get to, my parents' house, what we're going to do on the road. And then, when our plans change a little bit after that, they change their narrative. just very go with the flow. And I was very proud of their flexibility, their cognitive flexibility when it came to that.
Yeah. I was so proud of Reader because he was having a
so
really
upset.
hard time.
Yeah.
And, I felt like it was that weird parenting moment of like not even knowing where to set the goalposts to.
Right.
So, because we started out talking about Boxing Day and how lots of people give gifts on Boxing Day and we're going to have, a British Christmas. And then it became clear that like Boxing Day, I mean, we did make it there for Boxing Day, but
we might not have.
But we very well might not have. So it's like, okay, now what do we do?
Reader rolled with that and actually said something really sweet regarding that, we might not have our regular Christmas, might not have a British Christmas, but we might have our family Christmas. And that was really just it was very gratifying to hear, there are moments, as we all know, as parents, there are moments where our kids surprise us with their empathy and their insightfulness. And that was one of those moments where he exhibited a lot of maturity and a lot of just joy and flexibility all in one moment. I was very proud of him.
Yeah, I couldn't believe that he came up with that on his own.
Yeah, that was so charming.
What do you think was the hardest moment for you?
Just seeing him and go be disappointed.
Mm-hmm.
I was very happy that my parents, they travel a lot, and so they understand that plans can change and nothing is certain until you're actually there, boots on the ground. And so they knew that it was nothing that we intended, of course, and that we're just being safe. And it's better that we get there, not let the perfect be the enemy of the good, all that sort of stuff, right? But seeing the kids being upset initially was the hardest part. Because I knew we would get there eventually. Like the storm was going to pass. We knew that there was like a limited window for this thing to be a thorn in our side and that we would get there late, but we would get there and we would make sure we got there safely as soon as we could leave. And we did all those things. So for me, the hardest part was just hearing the kids be upset. But then once they got over it, which actually was that Friday, by that Friday night, they sort of settled into a place where they were just, they knew they were going to get there, but they didn't know quite what to expect. So there was that uncertainty, but it was more nagging and it was less grief.
Yeah.
So it was really that first hour that it was hardest.
I felt
for me
sort of weirdly thankful for the 2 years of COVID where we sort of had to go into all travel with an attitude of who knows what's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. No, to your credit, you start all of our family trips with this, pleasant refrain of, we don't know if we're going to get there. We don't know if anything's going to come up, but it's going to be an adventure nonetheless.
Yeah, I do think that was helpful. I mean, I think probably the hardest moment for me when we decided we were driving on Christmas Day and we knew that we wouldn't get there on Christmas Day, I was sort of down for the adventure of that. Yeah. Especially since the kids had a good attitude by that point. I think the hardest thing was heading into Pittsburgh, and I sort of hadn't thought about it, but I was like, man, I just had a moment. I was like, I do not. And it was Christmas Day, right? So it was a very weird drive because almost nothing was open.
Yeah, it was so weird.
And I did have a moment of like, man, I am cool with all of this being messed up, but I do not want to eat gas station food for dinner on Christmas Day.
I was ready for that. It was going to be a story.
Yeah. I mean, I knew it might happen, but that was, I think, where I had my biggest mental block. I just wanted something nice for that day. Yeah. And we lucked out so much because I think we found the only restaurant open in Pittsburgh on Christmas.
De Schaun. Oh my Lord. Wow. And they came through. And that was fun too. It was hopping. Everybody was there. Everybody in Pittsburgh who wasn't at home was there.
I was shocked. I thought they were going to be empty. I thought it was going to be like a Christmas story. We walk in and we're the only people there.
It was a super spreader event.
It was. I'm shocked we got a reservation in retrospect.
Like, I'm shocked we didn't come away with COVID.
Yeah. No, it was, but it, at a certain point when things go wrong, I want it to be like a fun, ridiculous story. And it felt like the perfect amount of ridiculousness to be at this like chain steakhouse where they bring meat to the table. And it just felt, after we got that set up and I realized it was going to actually be a fun experience, I was like, this is not how I wish this had all gone, but like, we're going to be fine.
Yeah. Bacon wrapped chicken is all I got to say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now I'm going to take an aside to call out something you just said, where you were afraid that there wouldn't be anything nice on Christmas. I would counter that by saying the fact that we were on the road across the border successfully more than halfway to my parents' house in that first day was something nice. We were all there, safe and sound, well on our way to what we would consider to be quote unquote real Christmas. So the critical person in me has to look at that and say that is the win, and you can't, sell that short. That was a really big deal.
I mean, that was definitely the most important thing. And that got me through about hour 9.
Hour 10 though, man, that was the snowball rolling downhill.
A little bit. But like, it's so funny, such terrible weather to start. And then we got there. I think it's like the most beautiful it's ever been.
It was so pleasant. It was unbelievably pleasant.
And it wound up being, I don't know. We've had so many special Christmases with your folks and mine, but it felt like a really special trip.
Nice.
Yeah.
It was nice. Yeah. It was definitely, all of it was worthwhile, including the minor aggravations, because that yields wisdom. And now the boys can look back on this analytically and say, okay, so we had a big plan. We were looking forward to it. Went sideways. We got there eventually, had a great time. Now we also have this wisdom that we can draw from that, if something happens in the future like this, we know what to expect from ourselves and from the situation. We know how to plan. We know how to deal with it emotionally, how to keep ourselves busy, and all the lessons that can come from it. That is a very important thing for them to gain. And they wouldn't have gotten that had everything gone smoothly.
Yeah.
So Christmas was great, all that. And now we're going to try one of those things for our new improved format that we were telling you guys about. This one is called Backseat Driving. Moms, take it away.
Yeah. So this is a segment that I wanted to do from the start of the podcast. Mm-hmm. And the idea is I listen to far too many other podcasts.
Yes, you do.
And a lot of them have the format of people who call in with questions. And I often hear one and sort of want to add to that discussion. So the idea of the segment is to take a question from another podcast and give our own answer to it.
So of course, it's not that we're talking about backseat driving and how perilous it can be. We're talking about how you are a backseat driver.
Yes.
Just to be clear. Okay.
Exactly. And
which is true.
And the irony is
in
that
real life, it's true. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. I'll shut up now.
So I guess that's fair after having been in the car that long.
It is true.
So the irony is I came up with the idea, and leading up to the start of this podcast, I was constantly hearing questions that I wanted to talk about. And then the second we started the podcast, I didn't hear anything for 8 months. But all of a sudden, at the end of the year, all of these great questions came up. So this is a new segment, and it also might be our only segment for the next 2 months, because I have so many I want to get through. Okay. But the one I want to talk about today, there's a podcast, Mom and Dad Are Fighting. It's one of those, I think it's one of the Slate podcasts. Really great. It's been an interesting podcast to follow because they've had a rotating group of hosts. And with each new group, it sort of has a very different feeling as a show, but they've all been great hosts. And I will link to the episode, but on one of their recent ones, they had somebody call in with a question. So I'm going to kind of try to summarize it. And I had one thought about it that they didn't address. And two, it kind of made me think about a bigger question that I wanted to ask you about.
Fire away.
So a woman called in. She does not have kids herself, but she is some kind of teacher where she works with kids and listens to the show. And they have a sort of once a year holiday gathering with some of her husband's good friends. And one of the families that come, she just can't stand how they parent their child. I was trying to remember, and I certainly could have gone back and checked, but I did not. I think the kid was 4. Let's say they're 4 for the purposes of this discussion. And she just felt that the mom was sort of constantly on the kid, like constantly correcting, constantly praising, just kind of never letting the kid have her own space. And so she wanted to know if there was any good way to sort of critique another parent's parenting, especially when you are not a parent yourself. And the hosts basically said, no. Like, you just can't do that. With like a few exceptions. I think one of them sort of felt like, you maybe have like one bite at this apple. Like, you can try it once and then that's all you do. Or sort of waiting for them to bring up something where you could say something. And I think most of the hosts sort of felt like the best you can do is just kind of model a different way of interacting with that kid while they're there. And I don't think that's necessarily wrong, but I had a couple thoughts. So just sort of like right off the bat, is there anything that kind of came to mind for you in that situation?
Yeah. I mean, you can do all sorts of things. You could bring up to the parent or parents, if you're the child's teacher, about one thing that the child
Okay, well,
did.
no. I have to correct one thing though.
Okay.
Because it's a little bit different. She is not the kid's teacher.
Oh, okay.
So she is a teacher, so she works with kids a lot.
She is not the child's teacher.
But she is not the child's teacher. This is just family friends that come over once a year.
Got it. So she has no real connection to the kid.
Nope.
Other than what she sees.
Yeah.
I would say your best bet is to steer a conversation towards teaching, since that would be, I'm speaking like, let me say, I'll speak from the position of teacher since I used to be one, where you would steer the conversation toward teaching in general, and then talk about things that, you do for that age group, or you would do for that age group, and you bring it up and you leave it hanging as like this open-ended thing. You don't issue necessarily any value judgments. You just present possibilities and maybe alternative methods to what they're doing, and you talk about the efficacy of them. But all the while, you're not actively pointing out what you consider to be flaws in the parents. You're just presenting them with alternatives, and you're backing up the veracity of those alternatives. That's what I would do, only because people don't like to be told they're being bad parents, especially a parent like that, where they're constantly praising their child. That is a person who really values being a parent. And so whether or not you think that that is the right way of going about it, the criticism will, like, if you do it in the wrong way, then whatever you could add to that parent's life will fall on deaf ears, because their armor is just going to go up. So you have to find a way to do it where their armor doesn't go up. And one way to do it is to make it not about them. You put it off onto a hypothetical, or you talk about how great this outcome was with this child. And you don't point out that the situation is similar to what the parents are doing with their child. Hopefully you're tactful enough where it's not obvious, because then that comes across as, cheeky, let's be polite and say.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it can be sticky because, a parent like that really seems to value the relationship with their kid. And so I'm saying, like, I would err on the side of expecting them to get riled up at hearing somebody question the effectiveness of their parenting.
Yeah. I had kind of a weird thought, which is, I wonder what their house is like.
Okay.
Because I sort of feel like up until about 5 or 6, kids are kind of like wild, destructive forces. And as much as she seems very open to the kid doing independent play, I sort of wondered, because I know when the kids were that age, when I went into spaces, it didn't seem like they were for children. I was very conscious of that. So I sort of wondered if there were things about that single people's house or apartment that made the mom feel like she really had to be on the situation. Because it's great to be like, hey, just let your kid do independent play. Well, like, if your house is all white carpets and things that could be broken, I have no idea what their house is like, right?
Yeah.
But that can just sort of feel like not an option.
Indeed.
As a parent. So I was sort of thinking, because I think she mentioned that there were some other kids there. And 4 is tricky depending on how social the kid is. But, could you set up a space a little separate from the parents that is like very kid friendly? Where you could just, sort of be like, oh, we set this all up. We have all these different activities, like whatever they want to do, and, maybe like she may not want to because it's like a party and she may not want to be in work mode. But as a teacher, if she could even be the one to sort of like invite the kids into those activities, where she could be like, hey, let me get her going on this and you go get a drink, or like make it clear that they're sort of trying to give the kids a space where the parents can be a little bit more relaxed. I don't know. That was one thing that came to mind.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
I also kind of wondered, because they only see them once a year, one time a year, how bad does it have to be to feel
my gosh, that's
impossible? Like, I don't know if that means it's like even worse than she was describing, or maybe there's something about this relationship that's kind of hard for her on another level.
Yeah. Or maybe the person who is calling in is just, a nudge or a busybody, and they just, they're sticking their nose into somebody else's business unnecessarily. Like, just because the person's calling in about the situation doesn't mean it's actually a situation.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't hear the call, so I have no idea what to think about it other than what you just told me. But that's obviously another possibility, is that, being skeptical, who is telling the story, like we're talking about with history, is one of the first questions you gotta answer to the best of your ability.
It did make me wonder because, we're pretty lucky that a lot of our friends have pretty similar parenting styles to us.
Okay.
Like we saw one of your friends from high school when we were at your folks' house.
True.
And it felt like the kids played together so great. And it, I think, made it extra fun that it sort of felt like everybody was on the same page with kind of how much supervision to give, how much leeway.
Oh yeah, sure thing. No, it worked out great. Yeah, I agree completely.
But I've also been with other parents where the styles are quite different. And it's like, that can be really challenging for sure. But it's not, like, even in the worst of circumstances, I feel like we've made it through for, like, a visit. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I can't think of a time where I was like, I can just never do this again. So that made me a little bit curious about just the level of irritation or what else was going on. But I guess the bigger topic, because I wonder, I mean, we're super lucky with how supportive our families are, but I feel like as non-believers, sort of unsolicited advice might be something that our community deals with maybe more than others because they're viewed as doing something different. So I just didn't sort of know in general, like, would there be any circumstances where you would want unsolicited advice on your parenting?
I heard a while ago one of the best ways of determining whether or not you should listen to criticism. And that is this person giving you criticism somebody you should take advice from, somebody you would take advice from? What that lets you do is that lets you say, okay, you know, if I had a situation about this, that, or the other thing, I would definitely go to this person and ask for their help, their guidance. And so when they give me criticism, constructive criticism in this case, about something that I'm doing, I'm going to look at that because I trust what they have to say. So again, it comes back to the person saying it. Would you go out of your way to ask this person for their advice? And if that's a yes, then they offer whatever they offer, and that'll be of value to you, or at least you'll consider it. And I found that's a really great way of just parsing through the noise, because it's so easy, especially in like all of our social media culture, to have people throw around what works for them. You're doing it wrong, yada, yada, yada. But if that's not a person who has the personal or professional credibility to actually make you sit up and listen, then you can just tune that out. Like there's no reason, like you could say, okay, that's great. And if it resonates and it's intriguing, maybe it's something you haven't thought of before, then you explore it. But that's on you to do that, not you shouldn't feel compelled to do it. Whereas if it's a person that you otherwise would seek out the advice from, they give you criticism, all of a sudden it's like, okay, I want to see if I'm actually doing this thing in a way that could be really improved for everybody's benefit. And so that's where I would approach it from. And if somebody were to offer me parenting advice, I would look at first what the advice is. And then, you know, if it's anything remotely interesting, either positively or negatively, I would look at who's telling me. And if it's some random person who's just another parent, I might just throw that in the memory bin. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But at the same time, if it's somebody who I don't know, who has a certain degree of credibility, then I might sit up and pay attention. Or if it's somebody that I do know and trust, I will definitely sit up and pay attention. But it comes down to is that relationship. What relationship do you have with this person, right? Beyond the personal, would you have an intellectual relationship with this person through what they do professionally? For instance, you know, like a child psychologist, I might listen to, right? A family therapist, somebody who sees, who experiences a lot of interactions and uses that as data to create statistical models that they then can use to help other people in need, you know, as the situations arise. That would be somebody that I would look to and at least hear them out. Even if I don't ultimately use their advice, because I don't think it works for me personally or for our family specifically, I would still let them, you know, play out the scenario that they would be using to reference to in giving that advice.
So if you had a good friend who wasn't an expert,
Sure,
but who you sort of valued for their opinion.
Yeah.
You would be open to unsolicited parenting advice if they gave it sort of in a positive spirit.
Oh, of course I would, because I would trust that that person would have me and my family's best interests in mind. Like the intention would be there. And at that point, I would look at what the advice is. And then I would like peel away the layers without necessarily even asking them about it. And I would look at why they might be choosing to say this at this time. If there's something that's going on in their life with one of their important relationships that might be motivating them to tell me this at this point in our lives, then I would take that into consideration as well, right? People are people. And when you're offering advice, sometimes you're offering advice as a way of venting something that's going on behind the scenes in your life.
Yeah, I think I feel the same way. I was thinking, I don't know if I feel so comfortable about that because for the most people, everybody in our life is so supportive. I was sort of thinking it might feel differently if you felt like you were getting a lot of negative feedback in general. If you were trying to parent in a way that was, different than the people around you to a significant degree. If it would be harder to get feedback.
I don't know. I mean, that's a hypothetical that I can't necessarily. I'd say that I would go back to how I would characterize the parenting question with the call and just assume that I would get used to having my armor come up. And I would just hope that over time, I would just accept that since I'm doing things in a different way from pretty much everybody else, that I'm going to get that sort of criticism and that I have to just accept that I'm going to get it and let it roll off my back and have like a polite smile and nod when people offer and just say something like, oh, that sounds interesting. I'll look into that and just blow it off.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that does, as far as the first segment for backseat driving, man, I can't wait to see what other ones you have coming our way. Boy, howdy.
A lot of the ones coming up are a little bit more sort of fun and fanciful, but
No, this was good. This was important because, as like you said at the top of the segment, as secular parents, all of us will find ourselves at some point or another in person or online on the receiving end of somebody like telling us that we're doing it wrong because our kids don't have gods in their lives. So yeah, it is an important thing to at least have an answer for within yourself. So when somebody says something like that to you, you don't immediately have this knee-jerk reaction that's negative, that derails your day, that sends you spiraling and questioning in a bad way, as in like self-doubt. Because it's not, it shouldn't be that. It shouldn't be that, especially considering increasingly there are secular resources for parents online where you can talk to people of like mind and realize that you are really not alone. Send us an email, rant. It's okay. We're here to listen.
Yeah. And that kind of leads in perfectly to the final thing I wanted to talk about.
Great.
Because I feel like a lot of bad advice might come from this next topic.
Oh, so, that's spicy.
Yeah. So
are we doing a hot take?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Not at all. But I wanted to kind of close out our discussion of logical fallacies with the
best kind of fallacies.
Yes. Or maybe not. Maybe the worst. But
or the worst kind of logic.
I wanted to talk about the other logical fallacy where when I was reading about them, I was like, ooh, I don't know how you avoid this one.
Cool.
And that is, and so the logical fallacy I wanted to talk about was relying on anecdotal evidence. And I feel like this comes up in parenting so much because anytime you ask for advice, there is a certain portion of parents out there who believe that whatever worked for them is like the answer of how you should handle a problem for your children.
You're being a capital Y. This is the thing. It's only a fallacy if you insist that the answer that you're giving is true, capital T true, because of whatever anecdotal evidence you're giving. But the moment that you say, this worked for me, I don't know if it's going to work for you, but you can try it out, it is no longer a fallacy. You're just offering advice based on your limited experience. There it is. That's it.
Yeah. I mean, it is kind of simple, but I think it is hard sometimes to figure out how much weight to give to anecdotal evidence.
How much is anecdotal, right? Like what volume of anecdotal evidence are you using? Because ultimately, one person giving one thing in their life as a piece of evidence in favor of this assertion they're making is different than you being able to see a number of different people having this experience that you can then create some sort of model of behavior from. Because then now you're getting into something like at least approaching science, because you can make a hypothesis and you can bear it out with all these people having this similar experience that either proves or disproves that hypothesis, right?
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking about it because in one of the videos, I think it was, who's like the debate bro who just talks so fast?
Destiny?
No.
Ben Shapiro?
Yes. It was an interview.
You called him a debate bro. He would bristle at hearing that because he thinks very highly of himself, that Ben Shapiro.
He does. So it was
Did he ever tell you his wife's a doctor? Which is why he has always such great medical advice. That's another whole show. Anyway, moving on.
Yeah. But it was they were talking about the homeless issue in Los Angeles. Yes. And I feel like I should add that we no longer live in Los Angeles, but we did for a period.
Yes.
And somebody was sort of critiquing that conversation. And he was talking about how the homeless population has exploded. And
of course he was.
Person critiquing the video was saying, that's really just anecdotal evidence and it doesn't really speak to what's going on in the city.
Right.
And that is certainly true because you don't know, like there are a lot of subtleties in those experiences.
Yes.
Things can feel different in your neighborhood, and that can just mean sort of a change in where the homeless population is in a city.
Sure.
It could be just how noticeable it is. There could be a lot of different factors. But I also feel like, over our time in the city, it did feel like there were shifts in what was going on. And I never assumed that I had like a full picture of what that kind of meant for the city as a whole. But it's one of those things where anecdotal evidence, it's not like no evidence,
Correct.
But it's not.
Well, you're not characterizing it. This is the thing. Like the first thing I hear when I hear somebody now in this year talking about the increase in the homeless population in LA, I immediately go to the rental market. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of people were essentially like marketed out of their homes. That same free market that Ben loves is what is generating in part that homeless population. And so if you don't qualify the data points that you're using, that also like maybe not necessarily going into the fallacy territory, but it is disingenuous at the very least to point to a homeless population growing and say, oh, look, it has to be this. That would be a fallacy. Mm-hmm. Where you're assuming this, where you're assuming the cause of the thing based on, whatever biases you have, right? You're seeing the explosion of the homeless population perhaps as part of your confirmation bias about such a big blue liberal city like Los Angeles, right? Like, it has to be because of this thing that I don't agree with, right? This social program they have that's bankrupted the city and yada, yada, and people can't afford to do whatever. No, like you have people that are allowed to own property and then charge whatever they want during a particularly tumultuous, financial time in the nation's history. And you shouldn't be surprised when people cease to have the ability to afford their housing. Like, there has to be nuance. And that's one thing I get into with a lot of people when I'm talking about these sorts of social issues and cultural issues online, is I urge for nuance, because that gets lost. Because one of the biggest issues I have with social media is great, it connects us, but it also allows us to reinforce information silos and to seek out and curate echo chambers. And that means that if you have a certain belief or a certain aspect to your worldview, you can then just subconsciously reinforce that, protecting it, because it's part of your ego. You don't want to change it, but you should seek out the things that challenge it, because if it's a strong view, if it is sound, I should say, then anything that you would look at that would potentially challenge it would be defeated by it, because it is sound, right? But if it's not sound and it's defeated in your mind, then you would be right in adjusting how you view it or discarding that view, right? Like, something that is true shouldn't fear scrutiny or observation, right? It should welcome it, because if it bears up, then it's true. It has nothing to fear.
Do you feel like there were any times where you were led astray by your own experience?
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh, yes, of course. I'd be absolutely lying to say I wasn't. And that was part of my deconversion. It was part of my gradual shift left in my politics. It was part of my increasing utility of humility in my own life. My growth as a parent, my growth as a writer, my improvements as a teacher and as a business person. Yeah, there are all sorts of things that I would think were the right way to do it, all caps, but then realizing later through experience that it simply wasn't true, and then having to discard it for a better model of behavior. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Can you think of Christian. One in your can you think of one in your deconversion or parenting?
One? What do you mean one? The whole, like, that's the whole, like, you didn't have to do a deconversion. You right? Like, but that is what a deconversion is. There isn't like a point. It's like the whole process is that, because you're starting from a completely different worldview, right? Mm-hmm. And then what you end up in, right? The deconversion as a whole is that every step of the way, it's littered with those moments, big and small. So, like, I was a kid that, being an acolyte and a crucifer in my church, I would be up there and I'd be like daydreaming during the sermon, because sermons go on and on, about like, man, my faith is so strong. Satan himself would rip a hole in the floor and rise up, and I would stand there with the cross and I would hold it up in front of him, and the light of the freaking Lord, like in Indiana Jones, would just shoot through the stained glass and just illuminate him with the Lord's glory and send him back to the pit from my faith. No lie. Mm-hmm. I would daydream that sort of stuff, being the storyteller I am. But that doesn't mean that it was true. And then realizing that my belief, the strength of my belief, the veracity, did not lend veracity to those beliefs. Right? How hard you believe something doesn't make that thing true. And it took a long time to shake that, because I went from being a theist to a deist for a while, pantheist, all sorts, like everything in between, as I finally, settled on, what, there's no reason to think that any gods are real. because they're like even being a deist or a pantheist, like it's just so weak for me, at least. It's so weak because you're basically saying, oh, I really think there is a God out there, but it doesn't communicate with us, or it's everything. And both of those are like, okay, so what? And so I just settled on being agnostic atheist, which works for me. But it took a while to get there. And part of that was just that, like those moments, that cascading array of acceptances that what I was doing was wrong and I needed to change it. And I kept trying out new things, gradually whittling away until it was gone. And that was my deconversion. And it took a long time.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, on the parenting front, I don't think I ever assumed that what I was doing would work for all parents. Mm-hmm. But I think I did have a moment where I realized it was so much bigger than that. And maybe I've talked about it before, but, you know, when we just had Reader, it was very easy to feel like all the stuff I was trying to do was, you know, maybe it wouldn't work for all parents, but that it was like having a real impact. You know, that Reader was confident because I gave him space to explore on his own, you know, mm-hmm. or that these sort of parenting things I was trying were having a real impact mm-hmm. because of who he was.
Right.
And then we had Go. And I mean, you know, there are probably subtle ways that I parented differently just because it's, you know, different having one kid versus two. And
it's not subtle.
Oh, well, yeah.
No, it's not subtle. We treat the children differently at a fundamental level because they are fundamentally different people.
Well, but
they are both kind and creative and outgoing, but they're really different people and they respond so differently.
That's the thing, because I feel like when I first had Go, you know, there are similar things that I would do. Mm-hmm. And they would just like, he was just his own person. Mm. Like the outcomes were totally different because of who he was. And it really made me question, you know, if there was, I mean, how you parent certainly matters for your child. I'm not arguing that you can just do anything, but I definitely feel like there is less of a direct impact than I believed when I just had one. Because there were some things I did similarly and then probably had to change how I was doing because it, you know, it didn't hit at all similarly with a different kid and didn't have any of the same impact. And it really made me feel like I was giving way too much emphasis to what I was doing as far as what outcomes were happening.
So you're saying that within your own life, you saw how if you were an outside observer, having had the experience of raising Reader, giving advice to a parent now raising Go, that it might not necessarily correlate. Like you would say, oh, that's great, but it's a different kid. I can't necessarily use that advice. Is that kind of where you're going with this from the anecdotal side?
But also it just made me think differently about even how to think about how we parent.
Okay.
That sort of thinking about parenting for an outcome might be a very, might overstate the power we have as parents.
Insert joke about trad family podcasts here. I say that, listeners, because Moms has been listening to an inordinate amount of Christian parenting podcasts. I don't know how she does it. It would drive me up a wall. Anyway,
it's not that much,
nothing against Christians or parenting podcasts that are not ours. Just that the advice that is given from these trad podcasts is like objectively toxic.
But it is interesting. I think it's really hard. It is very hard to know what you are overlooking while you're overlooking it.
Yeah.
How do you know what you don't know?
Well, that's the thing. Like we were talking about, or I should say, I was blathering on about information silos and curating your echo chamber before, right? But that's it right there. You don't know. You're acting out of ego preservation, and that's something that you'll do without realizing it most of the time. You know, one of the reasons why I embarked on, you know, like exploring small s stoicism in my own life is the simple act of journaling and reflection in the moment, realizing that I'm not beholden to my impulses, that I can weave reactions to situations in my life, and I don't have to be angry when something goes wrong, you know, and it's really helped me personally. But every time it happens, I just think back to how I was when I used to not do those things, how I was sort of led around like a bull with the nose ring, to act in certain ways, react in certain ways. And it's just a lot of it is not wanting to accept that you're wrong and protecting your ego because you're afraid to have that moment of reflection. And a lot of bad parenting comes from that, because you assume that because you are capital T, the capital P parent, that you are capital R right. And that is not necessarily the case.
That makes me think of a really interesting topic for our next episode.
Love it. What, how Pops doesn't shut up?
No.
Okay. Good. I love you.
I love you too. So I think we did it.
Yay, 2020. Yeah, our first podcast of 2020, right? Or is this 2021 now?
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it really is 2023. We're not trying to gaslight you nice people.
As always, we have to thank Jonathan Zalbin and First Frame Music for the music for this podcast. And I've been putting in the show notes, but I realized I hadn't mentioned it in an episode. We have an Instagram account now. So if you're interested, you can follow us at The Family Skeptical. I've been trying to make it a little bit fun. I've been adding some stories and pictures to kind of flesh out some of the things we've talked about. Sometimes I think of something after an episode. And so I hope it is more than just mentioning the current episode up. So I would check it out if you're interested.
Yeah. And so that wraps up this first 2023 episode of The Family Skeptical, where nothing is sacred except for our kids.